Have you ever watched your child or even your partner react to something that seems so small, so insignificant, that it almost doesn't make sense? A slight change in setup, a different texture, a disruption in routine, and suddenly their entire mood shifts. From the outside, it can look like overreacting, being particular, or even controlling. But what if what you're actually witnessing is not a personality trait, but a neurological response? What if the issue isn't the object, the routine, or the environment, but the way the brain is processing that experience in real time? Today, we're going to step into the neurodivergent brain and unpack why small changes can feel disproportionately big, why what looks like rigidity is often a form of self-regulation, and how understanding this changes the way we parent, partner, and respond. There's a moment from when our son was younger that I think about often now, but at the time, I completely misunderstood it. He was probably around 8 years old, and we were sitting down for what should have been a normal, uneventful moment. Nothing was wrong. Nothing big had happened, but I could feel the shift almost immediately. He adjusted in his seat, looked down, then back up, and I could see it building. That subtle tension that parents know, the kind where you think, wait, what's happening right now? But what I didn't understand yet, and what I now see so clearly, is that his reaction wasn't about the moment itself. It was about how his brain was processing that moment. Looking back, I can see that his nervous system had picked up on something being off, not wrong in a dramatic sense, but not aligned with what his brain expected. And once that mismatch registered, it didn't go away. It stayed active. It pulled his attention toward it. It required effort to tolerate it. And what I was interpreting as a reaction was actually his attempt to regulate. That distinction changed everything for me. Because when you shift from thinking, my child is overreacting, to my child is working harder than I realized to stay regulated, your entire response changes. You stop trying to shut the behavior down, and you start trying to understand what the behavior is solving. And I'll tell you, this is one of the biggest reasons I do the work that I do now. Because I've been in that moment. I've been the parent thinking, why is this such a big deal? And I've also been the parent who learned that for a neurodivergent brain, small mismatches don't stay small. They accumulate, they tax the system, and they show up in ways that don't always make sense from the outside. So if you're listening to this and you've had a moment like that where your child reacts in a way that feels disproportionate, confusing, or frustrating, I want you to pause and consider this. What if it's not about the moment? What if it's about the load their brain is already carrying? And this was just the tipping point. Because when you start to see it through that lens, you don't just change the moment, you change the relationship. Welcome back to the Path to Peace Therapy podcast. If you're new here, my name is Stephanie Buckley. I'm a parenting strategist, family systems coach, ADHD specialist, and sports psychology-informed clinician. I specialize in helping parents, teens, young adults, and families better understand what's really happening beneath behaviors, especially when it comes to ADHD, executive functioning challenges, emotional regulation, and the patterns that keep families stuck in the same arguments on repeat. I'm also a mom to a now thriving neurodivergent 23-year-old son, and I've been married for over 3 decades. Everything I share here comes from both professional experience and lived experience because I've sat on both sides of this. I know what it feels like to be in the middle of it, trying to figure out what's actually going on and how to help your child, your partner, and your family function in a way that feels calmer, more connected, and more sustainable. I created this podcast because I saw a gap. So much of what's out there is either too clinical, too surface level, or missing the real-life application that families actually need. My goal is to give you clear, practical tools grounded in psychology, neuroscience, and family systems theory so you can start making meaningful shifts right away. When we talk about neurodivergence, we are referring to brains that process, interpret, and respond to information differently than what is considered neurotypical. This includes ADHD, but also overlaps with sensory processing differences, anxiety, and in some individuals, traits associated with autism spectrum profiles. One of the most overlooked components of ADHD is not just attention or impulsivity, it is sensory precision, meaning the brain's heightened ability to detect subtle differences in sensory input such as texture, weight, pressure, sound, or spatial arrangement. Sensory processing sensitivity, which refers to the nervous system's increased responsiveness to environmental input, often shows up in neurodivergent individuals as a lower threshold for noticing when something feels off. This means that what a neurotypical brain may filter out or adapt to quickly, a neurodivergent brain continues to register, track, and process. This is important because the brain is constantly seeking homeostasis, which is the ability to maintain internal stability. When sensory input does not match expectation, the brain experiences a form of low-level disruption. For a neurodivergent individual, that disruption does not simply fade into the background. It remains active in the nervous system, pulling attention toward it and requiring ongoing mental effort to tolerate it. For example, a child may refuse to wear a certain outfit, not because they are being oppositional, but because the texture creates a continuous sensory signal that their brain cannot ignore. At school, that same child may appear distracted or irritable, not because they are unwilling to focus, but because their nervous system is managing competing inputs. In adulthood, this often evolves into silent discomfort, where the individual continues to function outwardly while internally compensating for a mismatch between their environment and their sensory expectations. To fully understand why these small disruptions matter, we need to examine the concept of cognitive load. Cognitive load refers to the total amount of mental effort being used in working memory at any given time. Working memory is responsible for holding and manipulating information in real time. And in ADHD, this system is often under increased strain due to executive functioning challenges. Executive functioning refers to a set of mental skills that include planning, organization, task initiation, impulse control, and sustained attention. When these systems are less efficient, the brain must work harder to complete even routine tasks. This means that neurodivergent individuals often operate with a higher baseline cognitive load. They are already managing attention shifts, filtering distractions, regulating emotions, and trying to maintain task focus. When an additional variable is introduced, such as an unexpected change or a subtle sensory mismatch, it is not processed as a minor inconvenience. Instead, it becomes an additional demand on an already taxed system. A helpful analogy here is to think of the brain as an internet browser with multiple tabs open. A neurotypical brain may have a few tabs running smoothly in the background, while a neurodivergent brain often has many tabs open simultaneously, each consuming resources. Adding one more tab may seem insignificant, but it can slow down the entire system. This is why individuals will often say, "I can't explain it, it just doesn't feel right." What they are describing is a nonverbal cognitive and sensory mismatch. The brain is detecting inconsistency, but because it operates below conscious language, the individual cannot always articulate the source of discomfort. This creates frustration not only internally, but also within relationships, where others may misinterpret the reaction as exaggerated or unnecessary. From a neurodivergent perspective, predictability is not just a preference, it is a regulation strategy. Regulation refers to the nervous system's ability to maintain emotional, physiological, and cognitive stability in response to internal and external demands. In ADHD, where attention, impulse control, and emotional responses can fluctuate, the brain often seeks external anchors to create a sense of stability. These anchors take the form of routines, familiar systems, and consistent environments. When a person relies on the same setup, the same sequence, or the same structure, They are engaging in what we call cognitive offloading. Cognitive offloading is the process of reducing mental effort by relying on external systems or predictable patterns instead of constantly recalculating decisions. This allows the brain to conserve energy and function more efficiently. For example, a child who follows the same morning routine every day is not being rigid. They are reducing the number of decisions their brain has to make before school. A teen who prefers a consistent environment is not avoiding flexibility. They are minimizing unnecessary cognitive strain. An adult who sets up their workspace in a very specific way is not being controlling. They are optimizing their ability to focus. The challenge is that when these systems are disrupted, the brain loses its efficiency. It now has to reprocess, recalibrate, and adjust in real time. For a neurodivergent brain, this is not seamless. It is effortful. And that effort is often experienced as irritation, discomfort, or feeling completely overwhelmed. One of the most misunderstood aspects of neurodivergence, particularly in ADHD, is the concept of masking. Masking refers to the conscious or unconscious suppression of natural responses in order to meet social expectations. It is a form of social camouflage where individuals learn to override their internal experiences to appear more adaptable, flexible, or easygoing. In professional environments, social settings, or public spaces, many neurodivergent individuals will tolerate discomfort rather than draw attention to it. They will push through sensory irritation, ignore internal cues, and maintain outward composure. However, masking comes at a cost. When the brain continuously suppresses its natural responses, it creates internalized dysregulation, which means the nervous system remains activated even though the behavior appears controlled. Over time, this leads to mental fatigue, irritability, and what many people describe as burnout. Burnout in this context is not caused by a single large stressor, but by the accumulation of many small, unaddressed mismatches between the individual and their environment. This is why a child may hold it together at school and then melt down at home. It is why a teen may appear withdrawn or irritable after a long day. It is why an adult may feel exhausted by situations that others seem to navigate easily. The issue is not resilience, it is the ongoing effort required to maintain regulation in an environment that does not align with their neurological. When we view this through a Bowen family systems lens, it becomes clear that these behaviors do not exist in isolation. Family systems theory emphasizes that each individual's behavior is interconnected and influenced by the dynamics of the system as a whole. When one member of the family experiences dysregulation, it impacts the emotional climate of the entire system. The difficulty arises when these behaviors are misinterpreted. What is actually a neurological regulation strategy is often labeled as stubbornness, defiance, or control. This misinterpretation can lead to patterns of escalation. One parent may accommodate in an effort to reduce conflict, while another may push back in an effort to build resilience. This creates what is known as triangulation, where tension between two individuals is redirected through a third. The child becomes the identified problem, when in reality, the issue is a lack of alignment in how the system understands and responds to the behavior. When we shift the lens from what's wrong with this behavior to what function is this behavior serving, we move from correction to collaboration. We begin to see that the behavior is not the problem. It is the solution the brain has found to manage its environment. The goal is not to eliminate these preferences or force flexibility in moments of stress. The goal is to build regulation first, then expand flexibility from a place of stability. This is where a solution-focused approach becomes essential. Instead of focusing on what needs to be corrected, we focus on what is already working and build from there. First, we validate the experience without reinforcing limitation. This means acknowledging that the discomfort is real, even if the trigger seems small. When we say, I can see your body notices when things feel different. We are helping the individual develop interoceptive awareness, which is the ability to recognize and understand internal body signals. This builds emotional literacy and reduces shame. Second, we create external systems that reduce cognitive load. This is where structured routines, visual systems, and consistent environments become powerful tools. When the environment does more of the work, the brain has more capacity for flexibility. This aligns directly with your work because you are not just teaching routines, you are building neuron supportive systems that allow the brain to function more efficiently. And finally, we introduce flexibility in low-stakes, regulated moments. Flexibility is not something that can be forced under pressure. It is a skill that must be practiced gradually when the nervous system is calm. This builds cognitive flexibility, which is the brain's ability to adapt to change without becoming overwhelmed. Over time, this creates resilience not through pressure, but through supported exposure. When we understand the neurodivergent brain, everything shifts. What once looked like rigidity begins to look like strategy. What felt like overreaction begins to look like overload. And what seemed like control begins to look like an attempt to create stability in a system that often feels unpredictable. Because at the end of the day, it was never about the object. It was about the brain trying to function in a world that doesn't always match how it's wired. And when we meet that understanding with the right systems, the right language, and the right support, that's when everything changes. This episode is for educational purposes and to provide support. It's not a substitute for professional mental health evaluation, diagnosis, or treatment. The more we learn to recognize the signs behind the behaviors, the more compassion and support we can offer to our kids, our partners, and ourselves. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this episode was helpful, I'd love it if you shared it with a fellow parent, caregiver, or educator who might need it too. You can also subscribe to stay up to date on future episodes and check out additional tools and resources at thepathtopea.com. Follow me on Instagram at thepathtopea. If you are in California, I offer virtual sessions if you are not in the Hermosa Beach and South Bay area. You can book online at the Path to Peace Therapy. And as always, take a deep breath, give yourself some grace, and remember, peace is possible, and you don't have to do this alone.